I'm Joe Burns, and in this video we're going to be entering the K-hole. No, I don't mean that time you took the client to Dalston on a night out. What I want to talk about is something that I've written about quite a lot over the past couple of years, which is this thing called the K-shaped economy. Sometimes when I write about this kind of stuff, it gets a little bit academic. Occasionally, it gets a bit esoteric. There's charts, there's theories, there's references to network effects and economics papers and all that sort of thing. But today, I want to talk about what the K-hole actually means if you work in advertising and marketing. Because as the world becomes more K-shaped, the way brands grow and compete with each other starts to look quite different. But first, and very quickly, what do we mean by a K-shaped economy? Now, this is the idea that instead of everything moving together, the economy splits in two directions. Something shoots upwards, the winners become more successful, the rich get richer, and other things, the bottom leg of that K, they drift downwards, the long tail gets poorer. Now, lots of people claim that this happened because of COVID, but I don't really buy that argument. My thesis is that the K-shape is in fact the natural outcome of an economy as it becomes more networked and digital. Where distribution is infinite, and marginal costs are near zero, and algorithms reward intensity, and attention flows towards whatever produces the strongest, most intense signals. I shan't get too academic here, but it's all down to the way that the power law distributions, preferential attachment, and von Restorff effect interact when they come together. If you do want to get into it, then check out my piece called Mid. Anyway, the result of all of that is a K-shaped world, and in this K-hole, the best capture disproportionate value, while the rest fight over whatever's left. That's all academic though. The real question for us today is this: what does marketing look like in a K-hole economy? And here, I think there are 5 big implications. I'm going to go through them. The first thing that happens in a K-shaped world is that signalling becomes very important. This is a bit counterintuitive. When times are uncertain, the instinct in marketing is usually to double down on functional messaging. Things like value, the feature set, getting really brass tacks about the product and trying to persuade consumers in a rational way. But culturally, the opposite thing tends to happen. When people feel economic pressure, it's status signalling that actually intensifies. Economists call this the lipstick effect, because lipstick sales tend to go up during economically dire times. When money gets tight, people still buy things that signal their identity or their social status, and they'll pay money for anything that suggests that they've got a lot of money to spend. For brands, the question I ask here is what I like to call the tote bag test. Just imagine someone walking down the street carrying a tote bag with your brand's logo on it. Would you instantly know something about that person? The tribe they belong to culturally, their worldview, what kind of films they might like, what kind of music they might like, their social and economic status? If the answer is yes, that means you've got a high signal brand. If the answer is no, then you probably have a lower signal brand. And that's much harder to grow in a K-shaped world. The second implication is all about intention. In a highly networked environment, attention doesn't distribute evenly. It concentrates around the most high arousal signal. Anything that triggers surprise, excitement, curiosity, hunger, laughter, basically any emotional response that makes your brain go, wow, look at that thing. If you look at food content online, there's a really obvious example here in cheese pulls. They're not nutritionally informative, but they're viscerally, sensorially compelling. They trigger a kind of deep reaction in people. And that principle applies across almost every category. The brands that cut through tend to lean into things that are visually striking. They might be culturally provocative or just emotionally intense. In this algorithmic media environment, the more mild signals completely disappear, while the intense ones, they spread. Mental availability becomes critical here, and this is especially true for value brands. This is the brands that are on that kind of value end of the K, chasing after consumers with less money to spend. If you're competing on accessibility, scale or price, then the most important brand lever you can pull is mental availability. This comes straight out of the work of Ehrenberg Bass Institute. Brands grow when they're easy to think about and easy to buy, which means being present in memory at the moment of purchase. In a K-shaped economy, this becomes even more important, because when people are stressed or busy or they're worried about money, they actually have less headspace to think deeply about things like what cereal they want to buy, and they tend to default to the brand that comes to mind first. That's the brand that is the most mentally available. So for value brands, one core job of marketing becomes really, really clear. Be easy to notice, be easy to remember, and be everywhere that matters in that purchase journey. Luxury works differently to the lower leg of the K. On the other side of that K equation, premium and luxury brands, the dynamic's very different. The message is still less important, but rather than building quick mental shortcuts, you need to craft a kind of aesthetic world. You need to create atmosphere. You need to give a cultural energy and cachet to your brand. What you're really doing here is curating a vibe. You can see this everywhere, from fashion houses to boutique hotels. They aren't persuading you with rational messaging. They're inviting you into a universe. The rule here is really, really simple. The vibe attracts your tribe, and that's so important in that kind of signaling environment of a K-shaped economy. Okay, number 5, the last implication. The final point is probably the most important one of all, and it applies to every brand, regardless of where you sit on that K. And it's this: do not go dark. When economic pressure hits, the instinct inside most organisations is to cut marketing. But decades upon decades of evidence suggest that is usually the worst possible moment to pull back your marketing spend. Now, the clever boffins at the IPA Databank, they've shown consistently that brands that maintain or increase their share of voice during downturns tend to emerge significantly stronger when the economy recovers. In other words, downturns create the best opportunity to gain ground, which brings us back to the K-shaped world we started with. Going dark in a polarised economy isn't going to let your brand just coast along. It's an active choice that is only going to lead you to that bottom leg of the K-hole.